This podcast episode is with Michael Tsarion. Michael has played an enormous role in my own spiritual and holistic development over the last 7 or 8 years. His depth of knowledge and research is second to none in my opinion. I'm not aware of anybody alive today at least who has done the amount of research that Michael Tsarion has done for his work. I was privileged to have him on Project Sovereign. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel and leave a review on any podcast platform. That would really help. For this one, we did audio only because the internet was a bit shaky, so I apologise for that. Enjoy the podcast. There is a lot of information here. For the last 7 or 8 years. So thank you for your superb work and thank you for coming on to Project Sovereign to talk with me.
Oh, you're most welcome, Alex. Thanks for the invitation, mate. Always good to talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about.
Michael, I'm sure this has been covered elsewhere. You've been in the public eye for around 20 years now, but I'd imagine this work has consumed the majority of your life, particularly with the depth of the research that you've done. What originally led you down the path of the work that you're doing in the first place?
I've never known a time when it was any other way, really, right? Except that things were gradual. Back in the 70s, if you have to deal with specifics, then it's more. I got interested in subversive symbolism, as it might appear, in subliminal advertising. That was kind of one of the big launch points, and nobody was the slightest bit interested, in following me in that research. So it was kind of something you had to commit to on your own. Mm-hmm. And that was good. That was a good discipline. Kids should not just necessarily be into things that everybody else is, finding, trendy, skateboards, playing marbles, whatever. This was something that was already going to take me in a direction. It was a lonely kind of road, But then a pivotal thing happened in the last year of school, maybe late 70s, whatever. I came across a book that really changed my life. It was a book of art by the very famous Irish author Jim Fitzpatrick, and it was full of Irish legends, beautiful illustrations. He was also a heavy metal, designer and stuff. Real famous in his own right. Really mega person, And then I read the text, and that got me really into Irish mythology, and that was huge. That was huge as well. So those are the two things I look at as still being relevant to what I do today. There was a general interest in other things, but nothing that really coalesced. It would have been those two events. Getting interested in subliminal manipulation, and then getting into Irish mythology. Those have to be key areas, really.
Mm. Sure. I remember listening to some of your stuff. I think it was on the Unslaved podcast with Ralph Ellis, speaking about the ginger-haired pharaohs and everything. And that was one of the first things that actually switched me onto a completely different history. To the one that we've been told. I had Ralph Ellis on the program about a couple of months ago, and he actually believes that the ginger hair, the gene of the ginger hair, come from Egypt to Ireland rather than that what your work says was Ireland over to Egypt. But have you got any more thoughts on that?
Good point. Yeah, he's not wrong, right? He's not wrong. Anyone, L.A. Waddell, people of great evidence. Anyone who thinks that, right, is not wholly incorrect. It's just that they're leaving out, a more primordial, ancient traversal, right, from the northwest into the east. And what can you do? You know what I mean? They should know better. They should have read the work that I've read. Ignatius Donnelly, Anna Wilkes, Commons Beaumont, Conor McDarry. Those are the ones I sort of do homage to in my book. But the evidence is obvious, for goodness sake. Professor Tom, one of the greatest archaeologists that ever lived, top-line academics have actually shown evidence that supports my thesis. And if people go to the Irish Origins website, I've presented it all there, So, yeah, these are new ideas, in a way, for the modern era, 21st century, whatever. So, yeah, I don't hold my breath waiting for anybody. I know what I know, and I can back it up. But I'm not holding my breath waiting for the world to get it or anything like that.
Yeah. One of the things that stands out with your work, Michael, is the psychological and philosophical outlook on everything, rather than just falling into the conspiracy realm. There's a lot of it's a lot deeper than that. It's a lot to do with why is it happening and why are the crowd being led down that path. You've spoke quite comprehensively. I did a summary of your World in Your Head article that you did. I did a summary on YouTube of that. Could you just touch on briefly like the work of Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud? What impact have those guys had on your work?
It's enormous, obviously. I'm one of the only people in this so-called movement that ever dealt with psychology. People have a completely wrong idea of it, and they shy away from it. Now, of course, Freud wins, doesn't he? Because if you shy away from a subject, coming up with all sorts of intellectual stupid reasons why you don't like it, he kind of wins because he knows that the reason you don't like it is because it's psychological. It's about you. So it's one finger pointing there and three fingers pointing back. So I kind of got threatened by that myself in the beginning, but then I got to like it. As I read more and more books and got familiar with that dynamic, that, the man who's raging, I don't love my mother, what are you talking about? Kill the man who says that, falls right into Freud. Oh, I think we've got the point here, right? Because why would you lose the BAP? Why would you suddenly lose your, and I've seen this. I've actually seen it right in front of you. The irateness falls into Freud's trap, because if this wasn't a syndrome, then you wouldn't lose any sleep over it, and you wouldn't, and also the avoidance, you wouldn't avoid it. So people's avoidance of something that should just be a straight conversation, a straight interest, proves the point. And so then I realized, slowly I realized I kind of was led in a direction. There's many stages to that, because I didn't know anything about psychology until about 1991 when I started picking it up more and studying it, in book form and everything. And I got jobs in bookstores, so the books were there, they're available. I would use my store discount and start buying these books and starting to read them earnestly. And actually, I was doing film school at the time, so it wasn't even that much a legitimate interest in psychology. It was to analyze film, you see, and some of the major film genres, as you probably know, like the Alfred Hitchcock era and the film noir and what have you, and even Gothic horror, require a psychological understanding. All the critics do. So it's not. I didn't open up any. Yeah. My God, I didn't open up any new fields there.
And you know Otto Rank.
Oh yeah.
What I like about Otto Rank was the question where he sort of questioned the legitimacy of psychotherapy in general. Is it worthwhile, and why were people actually doing it? Do you revere his work to the level of Sigmund Freud? Because I know he was only his secretary at the time, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was for 22 years or something like that. So that tells you the man knew what he was talking about. And I think that he, like Jean-Paul Sartre and others, I think their arguments are very, very important. But I still don't put them on the level of Freud. In my own personal thinking, I haven't done that, because that would mean throwing Freud out. And that's not a good idea. There's a lot of forces in the world right now, especially world feminism, that would just love you to do that. So coming at things from a more of a masculine point of view, I don't think it's a very good idea to throw out Freud, Jung, or Rank. What we got to do is find the harmony, the right place to approach them, which is a sort of a non-partisan, looking for the truth. Because if you throw Freud out, then you throw Kristeva out, Julia Kristeva, who was a feminist, but was a little bit oddball feminist, who took Freud's work into an area that scared her and scared the rest of the feminists. But you wouldn't even get to that aspect without the Freud. So Jesus, if Freud, you cannot love the hate the man. Our future depends on not throwing thinkers like that out, because if we do, we come under a different kind of mind control, one that suits women in our world, the duplicitous women, feminized women, enormously. And there's very few bastions against that onslaught. And Freud is one of them, as is Jung and other disciplines as well. So by no means can men afford, and masculine thinking women, oh my goodness, never should that happen. And Otto Rank is in there, necessary critic. He's in there. He's like the guy who comes and says, well, he's like a house assessor. You need him, right? He's very, very caustic. He pours some corrosive on some of the worst elements. And he's not the only one. There's a whole list of people like that, right? And we need them all. Erich Fromm, Karen Horney, big critics of Freud, they're needed. So the critic is needed, but the original is needed as well.
Yeah. Did you mention Karen Horney there?
Yeah, Karen Horney. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, she was a big one for the parents, wasn't she? I think she was one of the first ones to say how poor parenting led to so much trauma in the growing child.
Definitely. She had problems with her own daughter, as did Melanie Klein. They had daughters who were real problems. And certainly, Karen Horney was probably arguably the greatest psychologist who ever lived.
Wow.
And that's a big statement. But I think her therapy is extraordinarily important. Maybe not as more than Jung or Freud, but from a therapeutic point of view, I think it's more dynamic because she addresses the mask. Right. Other men had stated that we wear a mask. Other people have come up with a theory, but nobody had ever really dealt with it with clients as expressly as she did. And to me, it's huge. The mask. Oh my God, that's absolutely huge. That's what's wrong with the world,
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned in one of your articles was that towards the end of the 19th and early 20th century was a period where the psyche was beginning to try and understand itself again. Could you expand on that?
Excellent. I mean, that's just a brilliant question. If everybody asked me questions like that, it would be absolutely wonderful to do this work. Yeah, I mean, that's huge. That's absolutely huge. And you couldn't understand that, statement that I made unless you've got your Julian James online, your Immanuel Velikovsky's, and also just the history of trauma. See, that doesn't make any sense. Why so late in the day would the psyche sort of invert? And you're right, it's world. And do you know how long it took waiting to even get that article together to express that kind of thing? It's been on the shelf for the best part of 20 years. But finally I got to express it this year, and that is it ties into my work on Atlantis and everything. But the simple answer is just simply yes. So damaged was the psyche of man, right? The psyche of humankind, that it couldn't even address its own wounds. It patched them up in a sort of a Frankensteinian way, down through the centuries, and it's just let them fester. But slowly, a point came where, the plaster could be torn off and we could examine the wound underneath to see, how bad are things, and things are bad. But what other people would call the advent of psychoanalysis, I definitely see as, in the historical context, as a moment in which the pain of the traumas that are all, harbored in the right brain, they're harbored even in the cells of our body. This whole thing is an amazing study, right? The parasympathetic system has come online.
Yeah.
Many other in fact, the split brain, everything about our being, including the split brain, has come on as a sort of a mitigator to mollify and quell, this agonizing trauma that happened because of catastrophism years ago. Right now, at one level of looking at modernity, it's good. Just on one level, things can go really, really wrong. The wheel can come off again. But by the time that Freud was living, that's what I feel is now. It's not that Freud discovered something. It's that the psyche was calling itself, saying, "Who am I?" It's like defreezing from a freezing cold Arctic winter. And you say, "I think I'm defrosted now." Yeah, thanks. The coffee's better. I feel warm. I feel good. Maybe now I can turn to face the great trauma. So what trauma is like on an individual person coming out of a car wreck, coming out of, war, PTSD, I think the whole of the race has suffered PTSD in a most extraordinarily deep way. But signs are, and then there's all these forces that want to sabotage this act of introversion and investigation. There's also forces that deeply want us to be traumatized. I wonder who they are, right? Guess who? So, they want to keep us in a traumatized situation, so we're easy to control.
Yeah. So you think that all stems from some ancestral trauma? I know you wrote about that in previous works of yours. Yeah. Would you consider that the flood? I know not the flood of the Bible, but would you consider that a flood or fire or?
Combination, depending on different climes. Different countries, different nations experienced it differently. Some did around the Mediterranean. Water was a key thing. In other areas, fire. In other areas, it was a torrent, a cataclysm of unimaginable scale. This would be more up in Scotland, Iceland, Greenland, and the Arctic. Right. It was all of the above. That's why it's wrecked. What we call snow and ice, and fjords. Oh my goodness, it's a joke. It's like a traveler's guide version. Take another look, at the fjords. And top geologists have written on this, but who cares? Because there's the trauma, right? Somebody does if you have a car wreck, you always avoid the road on which you had that car wreck. You just take another road, even if it's twice as long. Well, that's what humankind has done. They can't face, even though it's written in stone, up in the Arctic, and it's written in the north of Scotland, the wreckage and the damage, these erratic boulders, and we get into the whole geology of it. Yeah, but unfortunately, we're dealing with cognitive dissonance. The trauma of the cataclysm in the Northwest destroyed an entire civilization that they call Hyperborea, or Ultima Thule, or Arctos, Polaris. There's a million names for the Arctic homeland. Is another one, So yeah, it's very fresh in our minds still on a collective level.
Yeah. So would you link like shamanic type thinking and shamanic work to psychoanalysis? Would you consider them similar things?
Yeah, because the old shamanism, which included herbalism and geomancy and extreme attention to nature, yes, it's very similar because it's all about healing. You can see the connections between those two the moment that you deal with cataclysm. If you're into cataclysm, then it's no problem seeing that we have our modern form of healing modality, and then the shaman had their own, And I kind of personally a little bit like the shamanic aspect because it gave a kick up the arse. Today anybody can go and sit down as completely degenerate and fake and false as they can, and call up a psychologist. Yeah, but the shaman didn't. They tear you to pieces. They threw you into the snake pit and go, see how you like that, mate. They were much more stringent and strict. We have it all too easy in our culture,
Oh, we do. Let's talk a little bit about the feminization of men, mate. Why do you think that's occurring? Do you think that's natural, or do you think that what's going on is completely arranged?
It's strange. It has been arranged, obviously. A lot of this has been co-opted, but there is a natural thread to it as well. I have programs coming out that will go into that more. The natural aspect would be that there are just absolute differences between the masculine and the feminine. And you could go back to the Paleolithic and you'd see them. The Star Trek and all have done these kind of funny ones where they show this, but it's actually quite true. There are such differences between men and women, like, those who want to be hunter-gatherers and those who want to be settled. There's one right there. And then when you are settled, there's even more, weirdness about how the women want to live and how, again, accuracy forms. And how they don't want to be fighting the animals anymore, and they start even forgetting about those kinds of things where the man cannot afford to forget, and all of that. So right from the off, there are amazing differences. And so imagine you were living back then and you had this vision as a shaman and you just sort of projected into the future, wonder what it's going to be like with gender dynamics. You pretty much get it right. Here we are, So in one way, and the fact that women give birth and therefore they have to be settled, and they're the ones who know who they had sex with, right? Whereas the man's saying, it's the gods, my ancestors have created my son, my child. And the woman all along knows, let them keep thinking that for a couple of thousand years, right? So deception is much more involved with women. A woman will always say it's necessity, that's the feminist jive. An honest woman would say, no, a lie is a lie is a lie is a lie. How can we turn around and claim that the men are this and that and the other when we don't even accept even one blame to ourselves? That's not racial, that's not equality, that's not nothing. That's just lying. That's moral turpitude. So the people who read my work who are the good masculine women, they say, got it. Absolutely brilliant analysis. Explains a lot. Women lied about paternity to men, and therefore this is that was the original sin that then got covered up. It's there in mythology, and the evil witch, and it's sort of like the Snow White and Seven Dwarfs, and the evil witch and the evil auntie or the evil grandmother, and the witches, like in the case of like a Shakespeare and sort of witches around the cauldron. There's an incredible story there that I bring to bear in my work about that. So some of it is natural, just based on natural differences and natural proclivities and the way people, man and woman, both responded to their environment. And then as we move down toward the 20th century, there's another hand moves in. As women became more standing up for their rights, became more socialistic. Basically, it's just a euphemism for man-hating. Extreme man-hate started to manifest. Yeah. And by the time you get up to the big cosmopolitan magazines and the whole New York scene and, the different waves of feminism, and we get to where we are now, it's a criminal syndicate ruling the minds of women. deeply ruling the minds of women. A lot of men are waking up, which I'm glad to see, but the women are still very much under the spell.
Mm-hmm. And Gustave Le Bon wrote heavily about crowd psychology. What impact do you think that's having on, well, feminism, but in particular the far left at the moment are just completely out of control? How important is that Gustave Le Bon's work with crowd psychology and what's going on in the world at the moment, do you think?
It's absolutely huge because, Hitler, that was his favorite book, meaning that dictators read him. Why doesn't everybody else? If you want to be free of dictatorship and tyranny, it not only involves the psychology we've been talking about, a genuine interest in men like Freud and others, and it also definitely deals with crowd psychology because Freud had read that book, and Freud was so moved by Gustave Le Bon's work that Freud's last book, which is called Civilization and Its Discontents, sort of harps on the same themes. He also got it from Oswald Spengler, the great historian. This was kind of it became vogue at the time. There's a couple of people writing intelligently on mass psychology. I could name other books, but Gustave Le Bon is the number one. He wrote a thing called The Psychology of Socialism. It's a masterpiece. Then he wrote The Crowd, the book you're talking about. So it's enormous because as we get more and more nihilistic, right, as the crowd, socialism is a kind of nihilism, right? And as the world or the women or whoever, you get more and more nihilistic. What does that really mean, right? It really means that they've run out of kicks, run out of thrills, run out of champagne. Right? In other words, by the time somebody's about 30, take a typical woman, right? That woman has partied and whored and just lived in a sensational bubble for most of that time, with man being not only a house slave, but a person who facilitates, who provides the cushions, who provides the electricity, who provides the products and the commodities that just take this extremely hedonistic class or species or whatever, gender, whatever they are, and just plies them with pleasure from morning till night. So as Freud said, then you may be grown up, but you have not left the pleasure principle. In fact, the cities today are basically the pleasure principle in stone. Our TV channels and magazines and all the bullshit of it, right? So this extremely narcissistic group of people, namely women, have dominated our society now and calling the shots. And the man is just still mostly a blinkered eunuch, right? Sort of castrati that just putters about. Maybe has the external image of a male, beefed up and six-pack and all the cliche Hollywood shit. But underneath, he's puff pastry. And most men, if you push them, that's exactly they're feminine in here. They're feminine in their minds. It's not bad to be feminine, but it is bad to be ultra feminine, where you lose your masculinity. Okay, so then what happens to a 20-something, 30-something woman who's exhausted all her hedonistic appetites? That person is so vacant, so gutted and emaciated, and so utterly eviscerated as a human being, as a being, because they've just glutted themselves with pleasures. Where's the last high? So using Gustave Le Bon as the philosopher, so to speak, I see that the crowd is the last kick. All the kicks are dead. You're burned out. You're jaded. You're bored. So the emptier that you are, the more that you gravitate, probably somewhat unconsciously, toward the last kick, which is the sort of collective orgasm provided by the crowd. So the crowd is top heavy with women, right? Probably always has been, but certainly is now. And and they're empty. They're empty-headed and they're empty emotional. All the other gigs of endless sex and breeding your child ever younger. See, that's why there's women are breeding younger and younger and younger. It's not because they have an interest in children. It's another kick. It's another look at me. It's all born out of narcissism, you see. But even that has exhausted itself because they don't know how to raise their children, and it's bored, just like having a pup. Then you just throw it on the freeway. Go, I'm sick of that. The crimes are happening right in front of our faces, and nobody's even addressing it, right? Well, I'll address it, right? So the thing is that these women now have become so pathologically bored and pathologically narcissistic and shallow and empty that the last gig for them is what we see in the streets today. We call it socialism or, social justice warriors. That's a never been more abused term. It's just a bunch of empty, vapid people trying to cluster so that whatever spark they can get of this high, again, this thrill, and they are getting it, courtesy of politics. They are getting it temporarily, but even that will fade away, and then we'll be in a nihilistic nightmare very, very soon.
Yeah. So I sometimes sit here and I consider myself how do I do my bit to make this better? And then I sit there and go, well, it's not up to me to make it better. I've just got to work on myself and individuate, if you like. What would you suggest to the person like myself who's done years of study now, nothing like yourself, but years of study? I spend most of my day reading and making notes and whatever else and creating content for people. What would you say to us to make our surroundings better?
Keep on doing that like I've done. I mean, that's all you can do, right? Just because I'm a bit more known and all, you know, I really couldn't even give a shit about that. If I had my life over again, I would have done it in a completely different way. But again, if you want to go towards, you know, podcasting, and that's really good, and even making films and, you know, going into deep. But see, all the notes that you're taking, see, can be a script tomorrow, or say a series. Say you start working with other guys on a series and they run out of ideas. You know, you can if you've been making notes for years, like I've kept meticulous notes. I can now, at a drop of a hat, you know, create a 10-part series. Say just on female psychology alone, or, you know, pick whatever subject, catastrophism, right? I can do that. So it's not a waste. So I would just say continue that. Stay the fuck away from people. That would be another, you know, recommendation of mine, because they're toxic. Yeah, there's a lot of problems right now. Always to stay sane, you stay close to the masters of the past. You know, Hegel's, the Schellings, the Freuds, all the people that I name in my work. Stay close to their work.
What do you think of Heidegger? His authenticity work?
Yeah, it's probably the greatest philosopher who ever lived, obviously, because he overthrew all the other traditions. I've still got a lot more work to do on Heidegger. You know, there's different things coming out. I just did, this month, I did 2 on Heidegger, lengthy things on existentialism and nothingness. So yeah, he's the #1 guy. And he answered philosophical problems that nobody else was really talking about, to tell you the truth. You know, there were a few other forebears of his. I'm sure he even drew upon them, Otto Rank being one of them. My suspicions is that Otto Rank played a big role, and others like Henri Bergson in France, and you know, Brentano. So it's not that Heidegger didn't have pre-accusers. Soren Kierkegaard would have been one of them, only the difference there is that Kierkegaard was a Christian and Heidegger was not. So it's not that Heidegger didn't have pre-accusers. But by God, that still doesn't mean that anything could reach the level of his insight. So, yeah, you know, forebears you may have had, but my God, their thinking wasn't like his by any shape or form. Yeah, probably Merleau-Ponty in France, who was a follower of Heidegger, he'd be the next one, I would say, that'd be close. Merleau-Ponty and Heidegger, and Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty, that's it. And if you could just study their work alone, my God, enlightenment would come to you, you know.
Yeah, I remember you saying before that, I can't remember where you said it, but it was something along the lines of, I know my limitations as a human being and I need to keep as close to these people as I can, because I'm not a genius, but these people are geniuses, so I need to surround myself with these people's work. And that sort of stuck with me. Yeah. So yeah,
I had to work it out the hard way, living in America, you know. Yeah, it was a terrible experience. And I'd already been studying, you know, the greatest thinker, there's 2 thinkers before Heidegger that Heidegger relies on the most, and that was Friedrich Hölderlin, the German poet, and Rainer Maria Rilke, right, the poet. And I'd already been aware of their work, right? You know, reading in the dark, I mean, not getting, but just loving it purely from a sensational, you know, and that kind of point of view, just loving it. And then came across the philosophical, you know, component of their poetry. Their poetry is one thing, and then, you know, I didn't know that Heidegger until I'd read Heidegger that, oh my God, he's explaining what these guys, he's influenced by them, and he's explaining in a philosophical idiom what they're saying in poetry. So that was a really positive experience. But I've been reading them in the 80s. I've been reading Rilke, trying to tease out what he was talking about, you know. So yeah, again, I was doing that already. But then by the time that I got to reading Heidegger himself, that was like 91. It was what you just said then became, and this was included Ayn Rand and Gustav Le Bon and a lot of other people, but it really became a dictum where I wouldn't even talk to people. You know, I'd put my Walkman on in the hours before work. I'd go to a sandwich shop, sit there, you know, maybe I'd have a chat with a guy if it wasn't too busy, and you know, and sit there and read for just a little hour, try to preserve a little hour, then the lunch break, and then afterwards, you know. So I just shut myself off and really hung up the phone, didn't go to parties, didn't have anything to do with people. You know, I tried to make every single minute of my time, because I just realized how much time had been lost in the streets of Belfast. I realized that my life there and the troubles, you know, had killed so much time, so much valuable time. So when I got to the States, you know, it was hunker down. It was really like a crash course I gave myself. You know, not in a panic mode, but almost like in an urgency. I would call it urgency, not panic, but urgency. And that urgency, you know, it did me well. I'm glad. I don't look back regretfully. It was the right thing to do. How else could you get through? I've read the collected works of Carl Jung no less than 5 times. I've read all the works of L.A. Waddell, Eustace Mullins, all the other psychology that exists. You know, I really do know these subjects. How else could you even do that time-wise if you're working a full-time job, which I did? You know, life will eat you alive. Life will eat you alive. So the pursuit of knowledge, you know, you have to then shut off the phone, and you have to tell people, no, you're not going to come to their stupid barbecues and all, you know, and you really have to do study. I was on holidays technically, and I never even saw the places that I was in. I had a crate of books dragged through the airports with me. You know, there's particular times when that happened, where I wasn't even able to enjoy or savor a proper holiday on the continent, or, you know, wherever else we had gone, even in America, because of the studies I was doing. You're going to read the collected works of Gerald Massey. I'm maybe sitting there, but I'm not there. I'm somewhere else. I'm in ancient Egypt now, you know, and I don't regret it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think that suffering holds the key to like mental liberation? So do you think it holds the key, like, you know, because the society at the moment, as you say there, is like hedonistic at the moment. Everyone just wants to feel happy and electrically buzzing all the time. Do you think running towards suffering and actively welcoming it is where actually the key to enlightenment is?
Yeah, as long as you include your attitude toward suffering. See, other people have said it, like Schopenhauer, that, you know, life is meaningless without suffering. And that's true to a point. But suffering is in the world. People do suffer, and they're going to suffer, some more than others. What really counts, and this was brought up by C.S. Lewis in his work, I don't know if it was the Screw Tape Letters or something else, that it's your attitude toward the suffering. Somebody can suffer quite unbearably and then come out and walk the streets like a fucking robot, like they haven't changed at all. I've actually witnessed this myself. And there's somebody who might just, you know, have a little sort of temporary moment of suffering, and it can radically change their whole lives forever. You know, so again, it's a matter of degree. But yeah, I would say absolutely right. You know, the Schopenhauer statement is very, very true. And of course, it happens on a social level as well. What we're seeing right now is a little bit of the dark night of the soul for a whole continent or a whole nation, you know. You know, so that can be a catalyst to awakening. Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Gnosticism, Michael. I know you cover that quite a lot, and you tend to have a completely different outlook compared to, if I put Gnosticism in on Google now, for example, all you get is telling everybody how great Gnosticism is. You tend to have a different outlook on that, don't you?
Yeah. It's sad that that's the way, because before the internet, it wasn't. There was lots of fantastic Gnostic books. There were Gnostic societies, right? I nearly joined one myself before I knew better. This would be in this would be more Palo Alto area. Look, and they're decent people, right? They're all a great many of them are completely misguided. You know, now I'm talking about a study I've done for best part of 30 years. It was one of the ones that I was doing back in the 80s. I read all the Dead Sea Scrolls, people, I mean, all of them, right? I know the best ones, Herschel Shanks and Barbara Thiering and Hans Jonas and Gillis Crispell. You know, I went into town on that shit, right? And then I started to wean myself off of it, you know. But to find out why. Stefan Holler would be another one. You talked about Jung earlier, right? So I went through all of this stuff, and I savored from it the best that was in there, right? But then I started to notice inconsistencies. It's a long story, won't go into it, and then that led me to realize that, oh my God, they've mixed this all up with Hermeticism. And then I trained myself, not being a very high IQ person and not being intelligent, I trained myself, you know, more mechanically to work out where's this coming from or where's that coming from. And then slowly, you know, if you watch enough movies and documentaries on it and read enough books on it, because there are really good movies on it as well, actually, then you start to get what went on. That at several points in history, right back in the Renaissance, at the troubadour period of the 11th century, and then moving up into the different eras closer to our time, there was a little bit of sleight of hand. And Gnosticism, realizing that it was empty and weak and false and basically perverse, started to add mixture with elements of a more pure traditions. They basically appropriated and stole from other traditions. And so the mix that you get now, that, as you said, looks really wonderful, and the Gnostics are, it's enormously funded as well. See, when we talk about these Davos people, and when we talk about these people in the UN, we're not aware that they're all Gnostics, by the way. That creature, that Schwab, right, is a Gnostic. So is Bill Gates. All of them are. They're all, Oprah Winfrey, Eckhart Tolle, the whole 9 yards. But we just have lost the filter we don't know how to diagnose for it. We don't have the meter anymore. So, but the decoration of the temple of Gnosticism has occurred disingenuously, right? Some Christians are onto that, which I'm glad to see. They kind of know that, and a few others here and there. But really, it hasn't. The thing is so powerful. The thing is so utterly wealthy that it is one of the great threats. So whenever I talk about feminism being a threat, Gnosticism is another threat that might lure a lot of people who don't know better, because they've got a lot of lures. The tarot has been misappropriated by the Gnostics. They try to use it for themselves, things like that. And a lot of other Hermetic principles have been sort of stolen, put in there, and mixed up so well that you couldn't tell the difference. I had to have this big conversation when I got to America, actually, with a person that I knew who was studying assiduously all of these matters, had been getting into a lot of this content, and was very confused. So I did my best, So it's always, I always remember that, because my first launch point within the first few days of being in America, I was suddenly knee deep in conversation about Gnosticism and stuff. So I never ever forget that. I was actually surprised that this person knew so much about it, and we had some wonderful conversations about the subject and helped me get things straight as well. By the way, at that time there was a surfeit of television programs, on Gnosticism. So it's actually it really reached a peak around the 91, 92, 93. period. Gnosticism was really in at that time, much more than it is now, actually.
Because a lot of it's to do with light, isn't it? And false light, the luciferic light that blinds you and you don't know where you're going. But they use light and the sun in particular as a symbol.
That's right. Very much abused. And also it's a philosophy of darkness too, because if you have light, you have to have the opposite. So the way that they frame that duality, now you're getting into the essence of why it's all wrong, because there is a dualism, and I call it the contrarium, at the root of all consciousness and at the root of all reality. But the Gnostic, it's like some guy standing at the back of a conference hall going, what's he saying, I can't hear. And you're just getting like snippets of the truth, right? And then that guy runs at the back and forms a cult. And everybody goes, dude, the thing's upside down, the script is upside. Didn't you hear what the guy was? Well, I was too far back, I couldn't hear it. Well, that's what happened. There is a bona fide story of the unfolding of the contrarium and the dualism, the positive disharmony. It's called dialectical monism. It's a legitimate philosophy, and many of the ancient races back in Alexandria and all had it, and they had a good idea of it. The Gnostic is a perverse, fragmentary, wholly insufficient, and ultimately corrupt retelling of a very, very sacred story. So, but I've done what I can to try and change people around. I think a lot of people are getting it. That's good. I've seen a lot of positive, people like yourself getting it and not falling into the trap. It is an interesting study. I always tell people, study the Dead Sea Scrolls, study the Gnostic Gospels, study the Nag Hammadi Library. For goodness sake, this is an aspect of Christianity, mysticism, Middle Eastern history. By all means, study it, but be very wary getting involved ideologically in it.
Would you consider, like the white people that are now like putting themselves in fucking robes and stuff and sitting on the, on the pedestal at the front, and you got people kneeling down to them and stuff. Would you consider that in the same breath as that, as the Gnostic cult?
Yeah, from what I've seen, because I was deeply involved, not me, I was deeply involved with people who were into all of that. Like my grandfather was a very, very prominent teacher in LA and throughout the world. He was loosely affiliated with Krishnamurti, who I really like a lot, Rudolf Steiner. I come from that tradition. And they bowdlerized it, all these people in my family and people around. They did it for all egoistic, narcissistic reasons to fill their empty life. There's no mystery about it, right? They were empty as people. They hadn't done any study. And so they joined the first cult that came along, got into those robes, rolled a few beads, start becoming vegetarians and talking a lot of shit. I'm a vegetarian as well, but the thing is that, but you see, I saw what they were doing it for. It was trendy. They were doing it for the trendy version in trying to be holy, not because of the love of animals, right? They were doing it as holy. Everybody else says, I'm going to do it too. It's just nonsense. And the whole thing to me looked like nonsense. And then hidden in the middle of it somewhere, you find some pure stuff. But yeah, it was so bogus, especially the California version of it. Multimillionaires. You go up to an ashram. I was not a member, but I was associated with so many of these places, a lot of them in the Bay Area, California. And you drive up to one of them in the hills or whatever, and as you're pulling in, you just see about $1 million worth, if not more, of cars in the car park. There's no bangers or junkers. It's all super wealthy Bentleys and Cadillacs and Lincoln Continentals and Shishi. And then you walk into the ashram, and I liked it, fair enough, quiet place to sit, to meditate, look at the hills. Not being a part of it. I'm sure I was even part of some Islamic cults, right? The Naqshbandi Sufi order. I was initiated into that. Hey, I would go there on the streets of the noisy area and sit there on the carpets and just be quiet on my own. They didn't include me. I said, look, I just want to come here. I'm a study of world religion and all that. Well, welcome, brother. No fucking problem. They're hoping that they'll recruit you later on. But I used to go there. I've been to so many temples and places just to sit, absorb the energy, or listen to Arabic, what they're talking about, just to get out of the commerciality of America, right? So I've been part of a lot of different things. But then I would turn and see these other people, who were so stinking false, having dates, cheating on their husbands, cheating on their wives, while they're part of an ashram. I mean, just the whole 9 yards. Don't even want to get into it. But it was scuzbags, and then giving you these false smiles and pats on the back. I don't know. I'm from Belfast, so I have a very strong meter for bullshit, and that's all I ever encountered with them. Terrible.
Yeah. I've got a quote here, Michael, from your article in Words We Trust. You say, the words of these charlatans eventually deafen us to our autolog. They hypnotise and slowly goad us into practicing the techniques of self-hypnotism. None of it would be possible without the power and magical influence of words on our minds. So it's not simply about mega success, attainment, prosperity, and living like a king. It's not about confidence and thinking positively. That's the great collective fallacy of our age. No, it's simply about hearing someone speak about it. It's your addiction to this that the con men rely upon, and it's what makes them rich. And that was an article from your article in Words We Trust. I don't think there's much to be expanded on there, but I think it goes hand in hand with what you're saying there, that the power of the spoken word from these people, and people just get lured into it.
Yeah, sounds good. Did I write that? I'm amazed. Came out good. Yeah, exactly. It's exactly what it is.
Came out good, yeah. You're happy with that, are you?
Yeah, Jesus, yeah. Oh, yeah. See, the self-deception is what that's about, right? It's not that there are not great truths, but these men don't have it. They have they're like hand puppets, right? Who know how to speak. It's sophistry is basically what it is, and it's ruled our world for many thousands of years. So that's just a warning not to get involved in it, and that's why I even do take on board a lot of the criticisms of even psychoanalysis, because that became pop as well. So, everything that was started with well-meaning people does get corrupted. That we just have to accept that. We're not in a capitalist society. We're in a community. We're in a consumer society. We don't even know what capitalism is yet, as people like Mises and people like Ayn Rand explained it. I mean, we may never be, although the way socialism is going right now, it may be a reaction, and a miracle could happen, but. Or, I'm even praying every night that China falls, Hong Kong pulls the red switch, and, oh my God, our economy's smashed. So there could be all sorts of silver linings, So, it would be great, wouldn't it, to live in the age in which we see the end of, because remember, why did China not, follow Russia's lead? Russia, the big heavy, the big bull, the big bear of communism fell? Oh, China, what's wrong with you? You even have more people than Russia. You could have stepped out of socialism and communism at any given time. What's your problem? What is this relic? What is this? Dinosaur still existing in the Eastern world? Can we be done with it now? So in other words, the plug should have been pulled on that a long time ago. It has to happen internally, or maybe a little help from the capitalists in Hong Kong. Maybe it will. That's what I pray for every night. So I think we're still ready to see some wonders happen. Right now, even on the political phrase. But yeah, it's very, very important that. People watch out for these soothsayers, these wordsmiths. Very, very important that we listen to what they say and don't turn off our own critical apparatus.
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned Ayn Rand a couple of times. She gets a lot of shit now, doesn't she? Particularly in America, I'm aware. Generally from people who have absolutely no understanding of her work at all. You mentioned you had a conversation yesterday, I think, with David Whitehead, and you mentioned psychoepistemology. It might have been with David, it might have been with Keith Knight, actually. And you mentioned psychoepistemology. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, psychoepistemology. By the way, I just wanted to say autolog was the term used by Thomas Szasz. He came up with that term, for the self-dialogue. Just want to make that clear. That's not my term. And psychoepistemology is not my term either. That is from Ayn Rand and her people. It's a term Nathaniel Branden, Leonard Peikoff, Ayn Rand used. And it's a really ugly word, but all it really means is the ability to turn upon yourself and examine yourself, right? Which everybody can do, but very few people like to do. And part of that self-examination, it's very value. They were trying to put the focus on values. So it's not just the ability to turn and say, what am I thinking? It's like the cat in Red Dwarf. How am I looking? How am I looking now? Right? Every 5 minutes, right? But that's in psychoepistemological terms. It's how am I thinking? How am I thinking now? What am I thinking about? Right? So you have this ability, and she just wants you to use it, because there's so much deception, both from external parties and then from inside yourself. You've got to be doing that constant checking. Not in the mirror like the cat does to check his appearance, but in the mirror of your consciousness. And she wanted you to, she wanted children to be aware of this and not think it was a neurotic tendency, but to see it well, so that you can always be analyzing through your reason, because reason is, she didn't say God-given, but obviously it's given. It's the supreme aspect of consciousness that everyone should worship. And through the reason, you're able to then check the content of your being and your mind. And that's what psychoepistemology, of course, nobody has it anymore. They've all let that go, and they want they want George Soros to tell them, and if it wasn't him, it would be some other demagogue. Everybody wants somebody to tell them what to think. And this is psychoepistemology. It's the total opposite of that. It's how you think, what you think about, and whether you're monitoring your thought in a healthy way.
That requires responsibility, though, and people don't want to do that, do they?
No, they don't. No.
Do you think Eric Newman said that he believed that the fear of nature is the manifestation of the fear of our psyche, and that's why we are ripping the planet to pieces? Would you agree with that?
Totally. And again, that's another great question, Alex. That's right. I do. Yeah, because psyche and nature are one. Schelling said that the spirit is visible nature. Nature is visible spirit, and the spirit is invisible nature. There's so much wisdom in that. But translated a step down for people to get it, it just means that your psyche, the deeper psyche, right? Because the outer psyche is mostly society's construction, but way below that is the natural order, a natural law, right? That runs below. And so absolutely. So our fear of nature and the cutting of bushes and trees and shrubs and clearing out, which you see in Britain all over the place now, all of that, and you see it in America too, but it's really rampant since the 80s in England. The Ogilvy family, some of these heavy-duty Illuminist families. But now everybody's doing it. Every Joe is tarmacking their garden, taking away the grass. People have to be observant of this, just to park their stupid car right up against their windows and all this nonsense. Right, they're desecrating nature, and that is exactly articulated to this desire to escape their own psyches. It's a really big subject, actually. Yeah,
huge. And you had, for example, Gustav Le Bon again thought that the collective hive mind was a will to return back to the womb for comforting.
Definitely.
Yeah, so it's, as I say, absolutely a huge subject. Wilhelm Reich. Wilhelm Reich, very similar, but he actually, I believe, thought that it was to do with it was actually psychosomatic. And you see it today, people are so fat and overweight and everything, and it's like the manifestation of the psyche. That's not a physical problem, that's a mental problem.
Of course it is. It's part of this dynamic we were just talking about. When you have dissociated from your own being so much, the body will suffer, right? And so the armoring takes on as fat. Right, a lot of people don't realize that. They look at armoring as being, spasticated muscles. Yeah, it is on one level, but if you read deeply into, the other Reichians, they will tell you that it's clear that blubber is a form of pillowing and armoring. So we see it. We see it in our society. Then the feminists come in and say, but it's all goddess, the lies they're telling, right? It's got nothing to do with anything but psychology. And it's a manifestation of the great sadomasochistic master-slave relationship that you have, first of all with your body, then with your children, and then with other people, neighbors, and then society. So what you see at the top is what you see at the bottom, and vice versa. And that's what we have to do. You have to worry about what should we be doing. Study the enemy. Study the socialism. Take it apart. Find out. Read Gustav Le Bon and many other people. Ayn Rand. I mean, you don't have to go much further than Ayn Rand. That's the crash course in it, right? For goodness sake. So once you've really mastered what they're talking about, then crowd consciousness will be transparent. And like I said, the vapid, gross, hedonistic monstrosities that make up the crowd, these social justice warriors, why are they top heavy with people, like that? It's because that's what's going on. They've already had their bodies and brains colonized by a kind of meme, right? Which is anti-self, anti-individualistic, anti-alpha, anti-heroic. So there's no humor involved in it. This is the sad decline of Western civilization into a big mud pile. What you can do about it is study it. Study the dynamics of it. Don't despair or anything like that. Because man will always build another civilization. These nitwits are just going down on their own. They don't have the faintest idea what manliness, heroism, and masculinity is, and that will never die. They're going to be perished. Yeah. They're going to die. They're just killing themselves. We'll build again. No problem.
I mean, throughout all of history, we've had civilizations rise and fall and whatever. Do you consider the US right now in a state of decay in that sense that it is actually falling?
Yeah, definitely. It's been, only thing that my message has a different message wrinkle is that it's been doing that almost since the beginning. We've done podcasts on it. We're going to do some more. We've come at it from different angles. Recently, we did a show on the Puritan conspiracy, right? In the sense that everybody's looking for some Jewish conspiracy and all, and there's a big elephant in the room they haven't seen. And that is that the Puritan Christian conspiracy is already lit the fuse of the decay that you're seeing today. It's a little difficult to follow, so we've had to do meticulous, podcasts on it so people get it. But in short, the very thinking of these Puritans and these Pilgrim Fathers was already so communized and distorted and murderous, right? Like if they did banish a dissenter and that dissenter came to visit a neighbor or just happened to be on the territory, they'd burn the person. They'd arrest them and burn them just for physically walking. There's no demarcation, so you could easily be fooled. You couldn't even come and, visit one of your relatives after you've been banished from these bloody stupid, Pennsylvania or wherever the hell, Virginia, So, and that's just a little part of it. And those guys were the first multiculturalists, the first screamers of reform in terms of minorities. They brought in all of this pestilence. And it was already, America hadn't even been founded yet. The Civil War hadn't even taken place yet. And already the serpent was in the garden. So, that's just one approach. Then there's others, right? All the way across the line. You can go to Jim Keefe. You can go to, the people who talk about the federal orgs getting in place and states' rights being, minimized. There's many ways to come at it. But my general point is folks don't think that this is just happening in the last 5 years. America's been in a state of decay for centuries. The experiment died a long time ago. I have an article on the Michael Tsarion website called Constitution Con. If this is new to people, go there, read that, and then go look at our podcast called Feminization of America. That's the one we do all of this analysis of the Puritans. And it will expand people's insights into the nature of the decay, the state of decay.
Yeah, you mentioned Jim Keefe there and people like that. To do with conspiracy, I've written an article not long back about like the psychology of conspiracy.
I saw that.
And how it works, but it works both ways, where there's a lot of bullshit out there, an incredible amount of bullshit, which sort of people put into one mixing pot and call everybody conspiracy theorists and whatever, just for, considering something slightly alternative. But also you get the other side of the coin, that people just simply do not want to think about anything other than what's being told them through the television screen. What do you can you expand on like the psychology itself of conspiracy? Do you consider it like spiritual work, or would you within a certain context, or do you think it's even further than that? Do you think it's like important for the human psyche to develop?
Definitely. I've always maintained that from the start, that anyone who thinks other than that is still hasn't got it together. A wheel has come off their vehicle, right? They're just going to go into the ditch at some point. And also, don't you see, like Wilhelm Reich said, do you think you could plow through all these lives without a heavy-duty cache of chi or prana or energy, whatever you want to call it, libido? So it's going to impact your life. You will exhaust yourself mentally and go insane. Like so many people in this movement have actually gone insane. Right? Literally stopped on the street, grabbed onto a lamppost and went, it's gone, I've lost it. And they were well-meaning people, but they overburned, right, the upper, cognitive centers. We weren't grounded. They weren't in their body. A lot of New Agers make this mistake as well, and then you fall into a sort of a Gnostic paradigm in which you're negating your pleasures and you're negating, smelling the roses and all of that. So there's lots of ways to go wrong here, and I've been probably experienced so many people going mad that I've known. Probably more than anyone in this movie. Oh yeah, from the time I was about 14, it started. Right, and by 15, I started to see the casualty list. And I even knew other people who had said that in the 60s they had experienced friends like this, going boogaloo. But they were all taking acid and LSD, right? The ones I knew had not really taken any drugs too much. It was more they were losing it because they were on the right path, but they lacked other things. You see, they lacked other grounding, or they were disinterested in their bodies and what. And it basically then damaged their minds. It burned them out. So there's a lot of balances required. It is holy work. I've always presented in my work as that, so my audience at least knows that from the start. So they're not going to listen to Tsarion and then go down the wrong. I'm so aware of not wanting anybody that listens to me to have that same problem. That I'm always talking about Wilhelm Reich and Arthur Janov and emotional processing and somatic intelligence. I have to do that. It's almost like a disclaimer because I know how deadly. You can just get into your head. You can just get into your left brain. You can just get into your garret and sit there in the attic, going crazy, basically.
Yeah. Michael, this might be a very broad question. What do you consider freedom to be?
Well, it's all attitudinal, right? That's the first place. You can go into metaphysical speculations. You can go into, we just did something on Kierkegaard, and his concepts of that freedom is actually restricted. But then you go to Schelling and Kant who say, no, it's not. There's a whole conversation one can have about freedom. And then you could say, it's given to me by some political edifice or my society, right? Look at Karl Marx. They all believe that, right? And yet these are the most anti-free people you could ever imagine. So freedom is linked to choice, right? It is one of those basic ontological things. But what I focus on is the people don't want freedom. They want freedom from freedom, right? This is, Eric Fromm's title. Yeah. And this is where the dangers arise, that freedom has been online in front of you, free of charge, easy to access, and yet nobody seems to want it. What they seem to want is the opposite. And this starts on the parental level with the terrible parenting that's going on, has been going on from the dawn of time. It's got worse and worse and worse. Like I said, I come from a Steiner tradition, where they don't act like that. And Krishnamurti, where they certainly don't act like that. So I come from a different tradition, so it's very palpable for me to see the kind of nightmare. And a lot of that's crumbling. A lot of the reasons why things are happening in the world right now is because that old status quo of adultism, I've written 2 books on that subject, right? That has to go. I mean, there's lots of reasons for the things that are happening that people just don't want to face. There's no way that, parents are going to ever face this because parents are tyrants. They're dictators. We have it right now in this thing about gender and whether young children should be able to have sex changes and all. And where's the parent in all of this? How did it even get to the platform? If it's not the child, it's all the parents doing that has opened this conversation. They're the bat crazy ones who've so fucked up their children's identity that's what it's about. So I also look for adultism instantly. As soon as I see anything to do, even remotely, right, with child welfare or questions pertaining to children and all, I'm already not looking at the child. I'm looking at a victim that's being, dragged on a chain and pushed from here to there by these imbecilic parents that are impervious to change. So when you're impervious to change, then life comes and hits you back. So many of the sociological changes that we're seeing right now is because we've reached the nth degree of so much deception and lies and corruption and intractable people who will not change their ways even when it's being offered to them the opportunities in the early days, lovingly to change their ways and look at these subjects. They haven't done it. So we're a critical mass now because of that. It's people's ignorance that's bringing this all about.
Well, once again, it seems to all boil back down to the hatred of self. It's like the ego has took over the role of the master at this point, and there is no selfhood left.
That's right. It's
just the ego running patterns, repressed emotions, and all that shit, just playing itself out, fractures in the psyche, playing themselves out. And I suppose this is where empathy comes in, and it's like, as you said there, look at them as a victim sometimes rather than a bit of a loose cannon.
Yeah, the ego is the construct of the society, right? Starting with the parents. And then the self is something different, right? It's the big mystery that's striving to be heard. And the same metaphor we just gave about things reacting, so the self reacts. You see, the mistake of the false is that you cannot repress the self. They really thought it could be caged and silenced forever. Big mistake. So there was already a flaw in your evil right from the beginning. That which is organic and intrinsic and eternal, it cannot be, ever hinterlanded, pure, even if you bring the whole world to try and do it, which is what they have done. American society, British society was set up for the self to be totally and utterly banished, and then the man of the self to be banished and censored. And that's part of the whole ultra-feminization of our society, because all the answers are there. All the answers that we need are actually in the writings of people like Ayn Rand and Karen Horney and Alice Miller. It's all there, but Melanie Klein, but nobody wants to, even Anna Freud, right? There's so many answers. Yeah. But nobody wants to listen. So they're bringing about their own downfall. So you have to then not get caught up in it. Like when I was in America, amongst all of these false people, I had to. I'm in the Bay Area amongst those types. I moved out luckily, but while I was in that environment, I had to, sort of screen myself, make myself immune. And the best way to doing that was to recoil. Right? I sequestered myself for study purposes, but you're still doing a full day's work every day, 5 days a week. So I started I studied them. My attitude was a Platonic one then, is to say, well, I can't do anything to, I'm not a millionaire, I can't just, sign off. So, okay, I'm going to study your sorry asses. I'm going to find out what makes you tick. Of course, there's nothing much back of it anyway after you do that, but nevertheless, it's a good exercise. But see, I started it years ago in the late 80s. People are just starting it now, but that's okay. There's always a time and a place. Other people are new to this, so they're going to begin this now, and they're going to be frantic, and they're going to say, "Hey, I'm lonely. My friends don't like me. I can't stand them. They can't stand me. What am I doing? I'm falling apart." There's raising suicides and all of this, or the doctor wants to stuff me full of medication, which they're testing. Lovely, Yeah. So the way you step back from that is to get okay with your discontent. Realize that there's reasons for discontent. They're perfectly rational reasons. You don't need medication. That's the last thing you need, because there's nothing wrong with you. You're responding to what Christian Murray called an abnormal society. That doesn't mean you're broken. No, the parents are broken. The society is broken. The school teachers are broken. Well, let them break apart. Let them break apart and fall. Something beautiful will come of it. I already see even this week that some mainstream newspapers in Britain are very much complaining about the lockdown in a really sincere way. It's like the media is suddenly starting to get it now. Donald Trump is out of the way. They don't need to focus on that. So they're going back to normal stories. And even these socialistic journalists still want to drink at the pub and take their kids out to the beach. So it's all this stuff is going to backfire. Even people that were champions in the last 4 years, that's because they had to. Right? The editors told them, you keep your job, you're going to do this, that, and the other. And there'll still be a lot of people, playing that tune. But there's a lot of people who are not. And I'm already seeing evidence of it where they're going, hey, maybe these anti-vax guys are right. You see, it's already happening. Seen in the Telegraph, the Daily Mail, and others. So, and then Scotland's in a total mess. Boris Johnson is backtracking on Brexit. Marine Le Pen is getting stronger every day in France. There's a conservative blowback happening even in Sweden, the most docile, feminized country on the fucking planet, let alone Hungary and other places. Yeah. So they pushed too far with their narrative. And it's a narrative that already had broken down. That's why communism fell. Didn't these nitwits get it? That back in 89, 90, and 91, right, first the Berlin Wall comes down, and about a year or two later, like by 92 anyway, Russia was destroyed. Right? The whole Soviet socialistic model fell and crashed to its ground, and only the most perverse, draconian version of it in China was left. What is socialist thinking? The paradigm in the encyclopedias of the world tells you it doesn't work, even with all the billions behind it and the crowds rushing into the street and breaking windows. The paradigm is busted. So I'm just waiting for the detritus. I've said on day one, in my podcast on Enslaved, that actually what you're seeing is the death throes of a ideology that knows it's on its last legs. And this is the last thrashing around, the last party of smashing chairs and making a big noise. But actually, if you study beneath it, it's because the ground has already been pulled from them, and there's nowhere to go but down. And that's that's why I'll hold to that to the end. That's true.
Yeah. Once again, it all boils down to selfhood, doesn't it? You can't go out to the crowd for the answers to anything. Everything that resides within, which is where, in my opinion, the main focus of people's lives should be, is their own self-development in the real context of the word, not the bullshit in the personal development industry, but real inner development and selfhood. Because one of the things that you sort of fall on, you might have been the same, Michael, is like some of the books here, particularly Eastern books, they talk about like transcending the self, whereas Western psychology and philosophy is more making yourself whole, Jungian type self. Did you ever fall down that, like, the transcendence of self and the wholeness of self, if you like? Did you ever have that dichotomy within you?
No, but there was a time, and it was about 1986, when I got so deeply involved with Eastern. I'd always been part of it, a lot of Eastern, and then there was special movements that I belonged to, that in order to commit to the next step, that would have been where it definitely would have led. But before I got to that step, it was about 1986, that, I saw through the lie, so to speak. So everything I talk about in my work is from personal experience, right? I know exactly what that is called, Socine, the road of orthodoxy, the road of dogma. And this time, and it was pretty much an Eastern religion, right, so to speak, which had a huge Western following as well. Then I saw the road, the road of Dasein, which is to say, no, something smells wrong. I was able to smell a rat, and I followed it up, and I found out it's not good. So I slowly backed off. The whole process took a little bit longer, but right from that point, I knew that this is not something I really want to follow. It had other things I liked about it, so I stuck very loosely, but bit by bit, year by year, as especially then after I came to America. Then, from my longer sojourn, right up to the present day, then it's like, that was about 1990. Then I started to get it right. But I did it very much slowly, because I was also studying what I was doing. I was going over the path. I was walking back up and back down, and I wasn't just going, okay, I'm finished with this now. Is there any other hors d'oeuvres? Like some fucking, buffet. I wasn't looking for another path to replace, or one illusion to replace another illusion. I was meticulously studying the subject so that other people who were trapped in that same path, I could easily dialogue with them. It actually happened on numerous occasions. None of them changed one bit, but I certainly shook them up, So I would be able to turn to any of those people, even even the leaders of a group like that. I could have looked them in the eye and had a dialogue with them. So that's what I did differently. I didn't just leave it and move on to the next, sensation. I studied it thoroughly, got to find a lot about it. I could write a book on it, actually, and I even uncovered other previous people who could also shine light on the falsity of this particular path. So you're quite right. But had I not done that, had I not in some way had these second thoughts, I wouldn't have liked to have seen what I would have become. So absolutely, I would have lost my mind. I would have lost my discrimination, and then those techniques that I worked out pretty much on my own, because this is back in the 80s. There wasn't any internet. There wasn't any instructional videos. There was very few books. There was really nothing except the books that they gave you to indoctrinate you, right? But I worked it out with my own raw matter, just as you've said earlier about, it's really about going within. Well, I did that, and I found the secret, left it, honored that intuition, and then I took that set of tools into other areas in the following years when I was maybe critiquing other things like Christianity or Gnosticism.
In India, you had Sri Ramana Maharshi, who was like a proper Eastern guru, if you like. And about 5 500 miles away, you had Sri Aurobindo, who was like, I mean, I've studied quite a lot of his work.
Yeah.
And completely opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of like how they live their life. But both could be seen as enlightened. Would you agree with that? Would you say, for example, Ramana Maharshi was not enlightened at all?
That's right. I wouldn't believe that. They think that they are. Okay, so let's put it this way. There's enlightened people, and then there's those who think that they're enlightened. Ramana Maharishi, Swami Vivekananda, Paramahansa Yogananda, all of these characters, in my eyes, were deluded utterly. They're not enlightened at all. That gets into a big story, right? Whereas Sri Aurobindo, was a properly enlightened, man, because he had, like you say, coming from the other end of the spectrum. By and large, with very few exceptions, all of the Eastern traditions are bogus, and this, I mean this even if you go back to where they started, right? They all started in the pre-Vedic period, where nobody believed anything that they believed later, right? So the Purunas, the Purushas, the Vedas, the Upanishads, they're all false documents, right? They're all appropriated from a much earlier ethos when people were more the high Arya, right? Who thought totally differently. Sri Aurobindo is trying to go back to that, and I'm in favor of that, right? Albert Pike wrote extensively on this. He knew all the 5 languages of India, and he wrote extensively on the Vedas, and his work is invaluable there. And there's other writers as well, Gerald Massey. There's such an extraordinary scholarship there, right? And when you start following that, like Mircea Eliade would be another one that really wrote on this. And then you start to see the pattern. Now, I was in one of these paths, and didn't believe, but you're reading and taking it for what it says in its own manuals. Well, yeah, of course. They're writing a story. I mean, where's the contradiction side? And what a funny thing happened. While I was researching these things, right, and then when the internet finally did come on, I'd already made the changes long before and broken away. But when the internet came on, as you do, out of curiosity, the things you were into in the past, go, hey, well, I want to see if that old show or that old program I used to watch is on, if they've got it online. Well, I did this with this path. And sure enough, all the workings out that I'd done was confirmed, because I found out there was actually 5 other paths, all rivaling in India, calling themselves under the same name, all claiming that their master was the original master from the original master, blah, blah, and all of them saying the same thing. I'm like, oh my God, I wish I had this 10 years before. Then, as I was looking at this up, right, there was a Sikh website in England. I think it was an English guy, it's since long gone. I can tell you why. This was a monumental site on Sikhism being as fake as hell as well. That by the time that the 10th Sikh guru had, ended his career and formed Sikhism, because Sikhism was actually really formed after 10 Sikh masters. The actual order of the Sikhs was quite late in the day. So it's only about 200 years ago. All right. I find out from this website that there was 36 different brands is the only word I can use for Sikhism, right? Where each one of these 10 famous Sikh gurus, if you open the encyclopedias, that's all you get, the famous 10 Sikh gurus. All of us are brought up, in those traditions to know about this. It's a great history and all the rest of it. Each one of those people had a cousin or a family member who pretended to be the next master. And there's 10 of them. And there was multiple people around them said, he left it to me. No, he left it to me, like some crazy Monty Python skit. And it turned out that by the 10th guru, there was over 36 rivaling cults, all calling them the legitimate Sikhism and to be the patriarchs of the movement. So, and it's the same with Christianity, all the different denominations of Christianity. But I didn't know that in terms of the East. And then I continued assiduously studying. Sadly, that website was removed before I knew how to copy it away or take some information from it. No, it disappeared. But I've remembered it to this day. And so I saw through the bogusness of it. And then I did a deeper study to go back to the origins, the pre-Vedic origins. And boy, God, is that a path. You've got to read some pretty wild people, right, to go back and to find, oh, hell, this is where it comes from. They all plagiarized the great work of the ancient Arya and chewed it up and mangled it so bad that you can't even recognize the original anymore.
And and does that got anything to link with Atlantis?
It has everything to do with it. If you see Atlantis as being the homeland in the west, the northwest, the Arctic homeland is another way to phrase it. But yeah, Arctos, Polaris, Ultima Thule, Hyperborea. There's a million names for it, right? It's in the Bach saga. They've got their equivalent of it. Every race talks about it. And the Arya were the displaced ones after that crumbled and fell, again, through cataclysm. Sure, what we call the Arya or the Druidic, the Scythians, they passed down through the steppes of Russia into Turkey, which was called Anatolia. It's a Western country, actually. People don't know that. And then, into the Hittite Empire and all over Egypt, it fled. And then over into India as well. And I've got all that information on the Irish Origins website for people. But, yeah, it permeated. And then it did flow back. There was a backflow later on in history, also in the AD period. And a lot of historians focus on that. And they're well-meaning and they're right to a degree. But what they don't understand is the really early prehistoric original movement, which, as I said, has been proven by Professor Tom. I've got the information on the Irish Origins website about that. Absolutely conclusive, irrefutable even to the most skeptical mathematician, that the West was the original homeland cradle of civilization, not the East. And by the way, see these Vedic, see these Upper Aryan dynasties. My family comes from one of them. They're only too happy to admit it. They admit it in their artwork, and it's in their traditions, and they used to verbally, before political correctness came to India, anybody from what's known as the Jat level, J-A-T, openly knew that their ancestors came from the Northwest. No doubt about it, no shrouding, no prevarication, no bullshit. All the upper classes of India accepted. The Brahmin classes accepted it, and that they are the top class. And even in the northern Indian classes, when you go to the highest traditions, they accept it. It was part of their history. It's only through the usual level of political correctness and shenanigans and lies that people started to back off that, and it became a taboo subject. But no, come on. The truth can't be faked. No way.
Yeah. And the Hermeticians and the mystical traditions, the divination arts and stuff, would you consider those going back to the Aryan times as well, or do you think that's more modern?
No, they all go back to a very early tradition. The zodiac is pretty much identical wherever you go in the world. Maybe a few changes here and there, but they're very minor. The zodiac as we know it, the Temple of Dendera, the Aryans had it. In fact, they had it in what was known as a stellar zodiac, right? They didn't even they acknowledged that there was the signs we're familiar of, but that wasn't their focus. You could almost think of that as a secondary zodiac, right? The original zodiac, believe it or not, was what was called the circumpolar region. I've written 2 books on it, The Trees of Life. Although it's called Trees of Life, it's really about this that we're talking about now. And that little zodiac that's up there on the pole, it's called the polar zodiac, right? Of circumpolar stars. That was the original zodiac of the absolute ancient area. Later on, who knows, right? Shifting of the polar axis or just the solar cult taking over. It became the movement of the sun through the 12. And it's perfectly legitimate, nothing wrong with it, right? And as a matter of fact, as we're going to be doing on a podcast very soon, the heart of my work on astrology is the 88 constellations. The 12 are just a pathetic homogenization. In and around the movement of the sun are over 88 constellations that matter to the ancients, and they knew them all. Pegasus, and what have you, Ophiuchus. There was a whole bunch more. Canis Major, right? And then you can even break it down to individual stars, but that's going to the extreme. Mostly there was 88 constellations floating in and around what's known as the ecliptic. And cults of the world worship them. So today when you see the symbol of the whale or the dolphin, or even the shell, like Botticelli's Venus coming out of the shell, that's all based on constellations. So the 12 that we know are the famous ones, but ancient cults also, like Native American Indians would worship Orion, right? Or Spica. Right? Spica turns up as the stars in Virgo. It turns up in the inauguration of America and the founding of many cities. How many people have ever even heard of that? And then you can go on. There's people who have written books on Cygnus. As a constellation. They think they got a theory there. So there was 88. So when you hear about Jonah being swallowed by the whale or Samson fighting the lion, well, that would be too obvious. That's Leo. But you know what I mean. There's all sorts of other constellations turning up. I just can't think of any right now. But like say the Masons have their beehive. Yeah, well there is one. the manger that Jesus was put in, the severed head of John the Baptist. It's all up in the constellations. So to make this, without going into detail, there's like 88 famous constellations in the zodiac. That was the original zodiac, and it was the one worshipped throughout the whole world before it became homogenized later on.
Fascinating stuff. Are you going to release a podcast on that?
Yes, I've done a lot of work on it. We're coming up this week with one on it.
Good.
And then that will only be like an introduction to sidereal astrology, but sure, the thing is endless. My whole system is based in it. All systems of astrology do, to a certain extent, incorporate what we've just said, to a very, very small extent. But these websites and YouTubes on astrology are pathetic. Oh my God, they're just like the beginner. This thing is ancient. This thing is absolute. And many of the symbols, like the unicorn and other symbols, the dolphin, these are the ones that spring to mind. The crown, right? The great chair, Cassiopeia's throne. You wouldn't believe that we are surrounded. Scottish symbolism, Masonic symbolism, African symbolism is all filled with these constellations. We've totally forgot. We don't even know what it is. So yeah, the chained woman. I mean, one could go on and on. And even in the Bible, you get all these motifs of Daniel in the lion's den and all. It's all from the stars. It's all stellar. So the zodiac has evolved over many years in different forms, and some retained the old form, some had a new form. But by the time you get the 12 signs of the zodiac, it's already late in the day. There's already been much greater study from before that. And then I have an article on the Female Illuminati website, even going deeper into that, called "From Heaven to Earth." People should check that out. There's even another story going even back to the dawn of Egyptian culture, where events in the sky also had an impact on how we read the sky, on omens, on superstitions, on signets, amulets, talismans, religion. It is an incredible article. It's not even that long, but it gives another spin on celestial events, changing consciousness and changing the way we see symbols. So it's an endless subject. Yeah.
How important is the merging of Kabbalah, tarot, astrology? What have I missed? I've missed one there. As
numerology.
Yeah, as numerology, as like a big holistic system. How important is that to merge them all?
Oh well, that was my original project in the 90s, right? About 99 or something like 90. I put my first website up, which was this mystery school, that teaches this system. But that had gone back to 1988. The studies of the primitive study of that, and the dislike of Western astrology, and the dislike of what's called Vedic astrology. Studied both of those and found them inadequate, quite seriously inadequate. Well, what do you do then? You do what Buckminster Fuller said. You say, you've got to develop your own system, mate. Or what William Blake said, you better come up with something of your own. And so this laborious task that sort of, I didn't even want to be, these things pick you. You don't really pick them. So a meticulous, and again, basically the sum result was, I created a miscellaneous form of astrological divination. There's many miscellaneous, like we said, the sidereal, the Vedic, the Western, the tropical, horary astrology. It's not that I've done something different. There's many versions of divination. But the way I look at it is like this. There's many versions of tea, right? There's many products of tea. Thai food, tea tips. But a tea leaf reader isn't bothered with what brand of tea it is when they're reading your tea leaves, right? So I took the same ideology and said, it doesn't really matter what the astrology system is. You can get caught up in that. And there are people, myself being one of them, that need to do that for technical reasons. But see the general public and the people and the simple idea of getting your fate read, you don't need to know what brand of tea it is. So I started working with both of those. The idea that, look, I have to, technically I've got to, hunker down and study astrology to create a new system, but I'm always aware of pulling back from the canvas to say, is it working? Why all this industry if it's not yielding the right information? And very quickly I found that my system does yield. There's a high yield of results and information, the same as you get from all the complex systems, with all their computer programs and ephemerae and tables of houses and atlases, compasses, protractors, and all of that. I'm getting it that way simply. So then I designed this, and one of the other helps to get that, to make the system work was to amalgamate not just one discipline, but all of them, even sacred geometry to a degree can be plugged into this. But certainly numerology, Kabbalah, astrology, and tarot. Those were the main ones to say bring it together, and that gives you even more dynamism, than each individual subject, no matter how good they may be. They're weakened by the fact that they're not conjoined with the other great divination arts. And even the great schools like the Golden Dawn and all, they really didn't nail that properly. So mine is like a lifetime attempt. That was my first major work in a more of a vocational sense, was to do that.
Yeah. You see a lot of people falling into these divination arts now, and a lot of the Gnostic false light type stuff as well, where they don't even scratch the surface, to be honest, and then they go around selling astrology readings and tarot readings and all that, and it's causing more harm than good, in my opinion. How important is it to actually go into these topics and give them the respect that they actually deserve?
Vastly important. It's part of the holy work that we talked about earlier, getting free of all of the different memes in your head, because you've been heavily subliminally programmed. Jim Keith was right when there's even a lot of electromagnetic poisoning in terms of altering your consciousness. So there are certain detergents that you need to pour on the psyche to clean it. And divination, again, it's all based on your own attitude toward it, right? But working with working with crystals, working with geomancy, sacred geometry, it's all important. These are the bequests of our ancestors to help us cleanse, so that no matter what apocalypse is descending upon us, as now, right? You'd still have sanitizing methodologies, to be able to, purify. And I'm very proud of the first site. It's 20 years old as of last year, maybe this year. So about 20 years. I think it started. I think it actually came around about 98. The first Taroscope's website, actually. But the Mystery School probably 99 or 2000. So that's 20 years. It's my oldest site, my oldest project. It's still current. It's still got members from everywhere. So I'm really proud of that, because things can fade away, things can get out of date or jaded or just irrelevant, right? So my first creation is strong, and that's really encouraging, for everything I'm doing now. It's not like, oh, that had to fold up to get to this, and like it is with so many other things, But no, from my first creation to the last, they've all been really strong and sustainable and worth their weight in gold, So I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, and you should be. I mean, when I spoke to David Whitehead, I said to him, I don't want to be blowing smoke up anybody's arse here, but I said that the Unslaved website is probably the most content-rich website that I've ever come across, and has served me and anybody who's in the right thinking mind, in my opinion. I can't find anything else on the internet that can come close to that. So I take my hat off to that, and I think you should be proud of it.
But your work is very good as well. We have to have you on. We have to have you on as a guest for certain real soon. And what's on there right now is the fraction. Yeah, and what's on there is a fraction of what's to come. The premium has been a little bit on hold, but with guests like yourself, it's top level. People are really doing the real thinking and not looking for another trend to follow. Yeah. There's so much to go into.
Michael, just before we wrap it up, mate, can you give me your opinion on a couple of people? Helena Blavatsky.
Yeah. I think in general, as a woman, I really like her a lot. I like feminists should be picking her up, but they won't, because she was an occultist, right? No, she was a remarkable soul. She would be embodied what I call the masculine principle in a woman, right? So for that, she's like Ayn Rand in many ways. If you get into the information, it's a little garbled, it's a little convoluted, but that's not her fault. Everybody at that time, from Gurdjieff to Steiner, even Swami Aurobindo, even some other well-meaning people, it tends to be a little convoluted, let's say, right? But at the same time, that's made up for by brilliant commentary on the yugas, on the root races, So you have to take it lightly, but there's really, really good information there that helps us expand, And then you move to the Julius Evolas, and you can move on to, the Rennie Guénons, and never just focus down on one person, because nobody has it right. No one person, right? Well, maybe Heidegger, right? But I'm talking about more the older. I'm talking about the other older scholars, right? Nobody has it right, because they were all seeking, and they all told you that they were seekers. Nobody declaratively told you, well, it's only me, I've got it, you know. So yeah, I like her work a lot. I'm not a Blavatskyite, right? But I certainly would recommend her works, especially volume 3 of The Secret Doctrine, where she comes down on the Jesuits. Monumental, brilliant stuff.
Yeah. And obviously the Theosophical Society's chucked out quite a few prominent figures as well. You got Rudolf Steiner.
Sure.
I know you've mentioned him a few times. You got a lot from Steiner?
Yes, he was a good man. He killed himself trying to help humanity. He was very into diet. So his works on dietary things are very interesting as well, you know, and other aspects of his work. So I'm very open-minded, you know, and yet I never myself, you know, signed on as a cult member, so to speak. You know, I look at him as one of the great geniuses, because remember, he was a protege of Goethe, the greatest thinker there's ever been in Europe, you know, before, you know, and his other protege was Friedrich Schelling. So the two young men were his choice proteges, Steiner and Schelling. So they're coming out of a tradition that's second to none in terms of German mysticism and German philosophy. So of course you have to study them. What the hell, right? These are the finest three intellects, along with Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty, that the world has ever produced. Okay? It's a no-brainer, right?
Yeah, and last one, mate, because I'm wary of time. We've just done an hour and a half. Last one, Owen Barfield.
Oh, you can't come to the bottom of his work either. And by the way, there's another name. If you have to have a name to that triad of Heidegger, Merleau-Ponty, and somebody else, well, that somebody else would be, you know, a toss-up between, say, like a Gabriel Marcel. But even Owen Barfield would be a perfect, you know, a perfect addition to that team, because he takes up what Heidegger loved so much, which was old languages. And Barfield is the number one brain on that, my God, right? And in a very similar way. And very briefly to explain is that, you see, he believed that not even, you know, because people like me talk about symbolism a lot as being real core and real primary. No, that's true, but Barfield adds something very, very vital that in a way Heidegger did too, and that is your first communal aspect with the world, right? Your first recognition of the world in hard terms is by language, because after all, don't we name things? Even if I live in a fucking cave, I've still called it cave. Well, why, right? Yeah. So our language is our first engagement with the world. We hear the birds singing, we hear the apes. Gerald Massey went into this in detail. And so we start to name things. So our first actual relationship with being in the world is with language. And it kind of it develops into poetry and all. And this was central to the Bardic tradition, the Gaelic, pre-Gaelic Druidic tradition as well. They've got it too, the same thing. Haiku has it as well. So he would look at that. He brings that to the table so that he realizes that but then he added this other thing that became more Heideggerian, and that is, in this naming process, it's not all benign. By the naming of a thing, you also own and control it. You classify it. You pin it to a board. Barfield brought that to the table as well, that there's a dark, negative side of language. We talked earlier about sophistry, right? Well, this is what we're talking about now as well. Again, any usage of language to name, to classify, brings on board science, which has so damaged our world, right? Because then the words that you're giving to a thing, quark, you know, multiverse, string theory, you know, they're having a meaning. AI, you know, right brain, left brain, they're you know, we're into the word now. And that brings on the left brain. And the left brain is the chief distorter of reality we've got, yet it works in words. So Heidegger, Barfield, they bring this, that words are good, they link you to the world, but they can also be bad because you're doing something else with them. You are like a predator. You're trying to, you know, stamp, like you what is it? When you brand a cow, right? You're branding the world, and then you want to classify it, and that's what's called in German Gestell, or in framing. And so those two scholars, Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty, and of course Barfield supremely, were people who were absolutely dreading, you know, this idea that through the word we've cast our net, and we're making reality into something that it isn't. And we're distorting it deeply in a way that it'll become so simulated that we won't even know. It'll become a world of words, and we won't even be in touch with the real thing anymore. So the word was meant to bring the thing to us and say, who are you? What are you? Candlestick, cloud, mountain. But in the same token, it can also push things away and push them away forever. And that will then cause a major mental catastrophe. So, oh my God, Owen Barfield is absolutely huge. Huge.
He was an inkling as well, wasn't he, with C.S. Lewis and Tolkien?
But his work is much deeper than C.S. Lewis. I love C.S. Lewis, but Barfield is the greater thinker by far. And he was a theosophist. He was into Schelling. He was into Coleridge. Right? His greatest mentor was Coleridge. But Coleridge was the Englishman who iterated all of Schelling's work without credit. Schelling knew it and said, doesn't matter. But Coleridge was a bit of a plagiarist, a great man, but he based his ideas on romantic philosophy of Germany, particularly Schelling. So Barfield, who worshipped Coleridge, also then, gets the Schelling connection. Those three are very much tied. But Barfield acknowledged it and acknowledged theosophy, whereas Coleridge, I don't know, his personality, it's not a very serious thing. It's just that people thought that Coleridge had come up with the word unconscious, right, because he used it in his work. But actually it was Schelling that coined the term, the actual term unconscious. Yeah, the philosopher coined that. No doubt about that. And so there's a little bit of a wrangle there, but ultimately that's all unimportant. That's just backstage stuff. That all of these men were great thinkers, great geniuses. And if we'd have been teaching our kids their work, oh my goodness, we wouldn't even be remotely in the world we're in today. No way.
Yeah. All right, Michael, we'll leave it at that, mate. Thank you for talking to me. I've really enjoyed speaking, mate.
It's been a pleasure. It's always good to have somebody, who asks intelligent questions. So Alex, great. And recommend your website. Really chuffed. And actually a little bit, impressed by definitely impressed by the work you got there, mate. So we'll have you as a guest soon. As soon as we can, we'll get you on Slaved as well. But thanks for today. It's been great.
Cheers, mate. All the best. Thank you.